for the whisper of God in the wind. The day is done. The sun has tucked itself behind the hills. The world has quieted down. And now, dear soul, it is your time to rest. Tonight, I want to invite you on a gentle journey. A journey not far from where you are, yet deep into the stillness of your heart. A soft breeze is stirring outside your window. Can you hear it? That tender hush that moves through the trees, brushing against the grass like a lullaby from heaven. It is in that breeze where something sacred lies, something ancient, something kind. You see, God doesn't always speak in thunder or fire. Sometimes he whispers. And sometimes the whisper is louder than a storm. This story is for you. Yes, you. The one who prays in the dark and wonders if heaven is listening. The one who longs to feel close to something holy. The one whose soul is tired from the noise of the world. Let this be your time to let go. Let go of the burdens of today. Let go of the noise that clutters your mind. Let go of the fears that visit you in the night. You are safe here. You are loved here. And in the stillness of this moment, you may hear something you didn't expect. Not with your ears, but with your heart. So close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let the quiet settle around you like a soft blanket. Let the wind begin to speak, because this is the night when God whispers. The village was small, so small that if you stood on the tallest hill and stretched your arms wide, you could almost embrace the whole of it. It lay nestled between golden fields and sleeping hills, where the wind moved gently through tall grasses like fingers playing an old lullaby. There were no paved roads here, no glowing streetlights, only lanterns that flickered in windows and stars that seemed to come closer at night, as if to listen to the prayers whispered into the sky. And in this village lived a boy named Micah. He was not famous, nor the son of anyone particularly important. His father was a shepherd, as his father had been before him, and Micah too had taken up the staff and the habit of early mornings and long evenings in the field. Micah was 12, with sun-browned skin and curious eyes that always seemed to be asking questions. Not out loud, but silently, in the way he looked at the wind, or the stars, or the open Bible his mother read by firelight. There was a gentleness about him, a softness that made even the sheep seem to trust him more than others. But what made Micah different, truly different, was not something anyone could see. It was a quiet ache inside him, a longing that stirred each night as he lay beneath the sky, watching the moon rise and the constellations shift overhead. He wanted to hear the voice of God, not the kind of voice others spoke of in sermons or stories, not even the thunder or the fire in the old tales of Moses and Elijah. Micah didn't expect miracles. What he longed for was something simpler and somehow more profound. A whisper, a word, anything just to know that God was near, that he had not forgotten the fields, the quiet boys, the ones who didn't make noise in the synagogue. Every evening after his chores, Micah would climb a small hill just beyond the pasture. The villagers called it his quiet hill, though no one remembered why. From there, he could see the entire valley bathed in dusk. He would lie down among the wildflowers, blue, yellow, and white, and wait for the stars to blink into being. Sometimes he would pray aloud. Sometimes he would sing an old psalm, barely above a hum. And sometimes he would say nothing at all, only listen. But night after night, there was no answer, only the sound of sheep rustling below, the creak of a tree branch swaying overhead, the hush of the wind, like a sleeping breath moving across the grass. Still, he came, every night, because something in him believed that even silence could be holy. One evening, as the sky dimmed into deep lavender and the air grew cooler, Micah lay back on the hill and stared upward. He thought of Samuel, the boy prophet, how God had called him in the night, not once, but 3 times. How Samuel had answered, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Micah whispered those words into the breeze. "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." But all he heard in return was the wind in the trees. He closed his eyes, disappointed, but not angry. He had no bitterness in his soul, only a quiet wondering. Was it possible, he thought, that God didn't speak to boys like him? Maybe God spoke to prophets and kings. Maybe God was too holy to bother with a shepherd's son who sang psalms off key and sometimes forgot his prayers at bedtime. Maybe heaven was just far away. Micah turned on his side and pulled his cloak around him. He would rest there tonight, under the stars. He often did. The sheep were nearby, and he felt more at peace in the open than inside 4 walls. As he began to drift into sleep, he thought he heard something. Not a voice, not exactly. More like the absence of sound wrapped in warmth. It was the wind, but different. It wasn't rushing or playful now. It was steady, as if moving with purpose. It brushed across his cheek like a hand. He opened his eyes and looked up, and for a moment he felt watched. Not in a fearful way, in the way a parent watches a child sleep, with tenderness. His heart beat a little faster. Was this it? Was this the beginning of something? But then the breeze passed, and the moment faded. No words, no visions. Only stars and sky. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The next morning, Micah returned home as the village roosters began to crow. His mother greeted him with a knowing smile and handed him warm bread. She said nothing about the night. She never did, but she always knew when Micah had spent the evening alone on Quiet Hill. Later that day, while helping his father gather wool, Micah asked quietly, "Did God ever speak to you, Papa?" His father paused, hands rough with labor. "Once," he said. "I was much younger, maybe your age. I was afraid of something I can't even remember now. And I heard a voice, not with my ears, but in here." He tapped his chest gently. It said, "I am with you." Micah was quiet. His father looked at him. "I want to hear him," Micah said, barely audible. His father smiled. "Then keep listening." That night, Micah went again to Quiet Hill, and the night after that, he did not demand answers. He did not insist. He simply listened. Because deep down, he had begun to believe something. Maybe the whisper of God was not loud. Maybe it did not come when you called, like thunder or fire. Maybe it was like the wind, gentle, invisible, but always near. And so the boy returned to the field, night after night, waiting not for noisy but for presence. Micah was beginning to understand something. He did not have the words for it yet, not fully, but it lived in the pauses between his thoughts, like morning mist that drifts silently over the ground before the sun rises. It wasn't a lesson taught to him, nor something he had read in a scroll. It was more like something remembered, something that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. The silence. He was beginning to see it not as absence, but as invitation. Still, some nights were harder than others. There were evenings when Micah felt close to something holy, when the stars above seemed to echo the quiet stirrings in his heart. On those nights, he felt as though God were just behind the breeze, not speaking in words, but simply being present, near. But then there were other nights when the sky felt cold and empty, and the field below was just grass and dirt. Nights when Micah's prayers, though whispered with all his heart, seemed to drift upward and dissolve into nothing. No answer, no warmth, just silence. And it was on one such night that Micah found himself questioning not just the silence but himself. He sat on quiet hill, knees drawn to his chest, his shepherd's cloak wrapped around him like a fragile shield against the growing wind. The stars were out, yes, but they seemed distant, uncaring. The moon was veiled behind thin clouds, pale and hesitant. He had just finished praying, a prayer not long, but honest. God, are you there? I don't need anything. I just want to hear you. Just once. I'll listen, I promise. But there had been no reply. Not in the wind, not in the rustling trees, not even in the stillness that sometimes brought him peace. Nothing. Micah exhaled slowly, shoulders sinking. He felt small, not just because of the size of the sky or the vastness of the field, but because he began to believe that perhaps he simply didn't matter enough to be heard. Maybe he wasn't good enough. Maybe he didn't pray correctly. Maybe God's voice wasn't meant for quiet boys in forgotten villages. His eyes filled with tears, not from sorrow exactly, but from a tired longing that had worn thin, a soft grief. He didn't cry loudly, just let the tears fall in silence, the way the dew falls unseen at night. And then, in the middle of that stillness, he whispered, "Do you only speak to those who are holy? Do I have to be someone else to be loved?" The wind blew gently, stirring the grass, but offered no reply. Micah laid down, heart heavy, and stared up at the heavens. Maybe, he thought, God speaks in ways I don't understand. Or maybe he doesn't speak to me at all. But as he closed his eyes, his thoughts still circling that quiet ache inside him, something unexpected happened. He didn't hear a voice. He didn't see a vision, but he remembered a memory. He was 5 years old again, running barefoot through the same fields, chasing a butterfly with golden wings. He had fallen, scraped his knee, and cried out. Before anyone could reach him, a warm breeze had swept through the tall grass, and for a moment he had stopped crying, not because the pain disappeared, but because the wind had felt kind, as if something unseen had knelt beside him and said without words, "You're not alone." That moment returned to him now, not with clarity, but with comfort. Maybe, Micah thought, the silence was not rejection. Maybe it was the space where God waited for him to remember that he had been there all along. The next morning, Micah helped his mother collect olives from the grove. The trees were old, their trunks twisted with age and wisdom. The wind danced through the branches, shaking the leaves with a gentle whisper. Micah worked quietly, lost in thought. His mother looked at him and asked softly, "Did you dream last night?" Micah paused. "Not really. But I remembered something." His mother smiled. God often speaks through remembering. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. That night, after the village had grown still and the sheep had settled into soft bleating bundles, Micah returned once more to Quiet Hill. He did not bring any expectations. He did not come to bargain with heaven. He simply came to be with God. And this time he did not speak. He let his heart become a prayer, not formed in words but in breath, in stillness, in presence. The night air wrapped around him like a cloak. The stars blinked above, patient and old. And the wind, faithful and slow, moved through the field as if it knew where to go. Micah closed his eyes. He breathed in, and as he exhaled, something softened deep within him. The ache of needing answers began to fade. He didn't need to hear a voice tonight. He only needed to remember that God was not far. Far above, in a sky so wide it could never be measured, the stars gleamed with ancient light. Far below, in a simple field that few would ever notice, a boy rested. Not with answers, but with peace. And sometimes peace is the only answer we need. The days grew shorter. The warmth of the sun, once steady and golden, began to fade earlier with each passing evening. The fields, once green and humming with life, now turned quiet, their grasses bowed with the weight of cooler winds. The village rooftops smoked more often as fires were lit against the early chill, and the sheep grew heavier with wool, huddling close together as if to share forgotten stories in the dark. Micah felt it too, the turning of seasons, the slow hush falling over the land. But there was something else, something he could not name. It wasn't just the coming of winter. It was something inside him, a stillness. At first, it felt like silence, but not the same kind he had come to cherish on Quiet Hill. This stillness was thicker, heavier, like the hush before a storm, even though the skies were clear. Micah could not explain it. He still prayed, still visited Quiet Hill, still watched the stars arrive like faithful old friends. But something had changed. It wasn't that God felt absent. No, Micah had come to understand that absence was an illusion, a trick of the soul. What he felt now was stranger. It was as if God was near, closer than ever, but waiting, watching. Micah could sense it, the presence, and yet it did not move. It did not whisper. It did not brush past his cheek in the breeze or wrap around his shoulders like a warm wind. It simply remained, and that frightened him more than silence ever had. One evening, as dusk descended like a violet curtain across the hills, Micah sat beside the old olive tree on Quiet Hill. He didn't speak. He hadn't spoken in prayer for 3 nights now, not because he didn't want to, but because something inside him had gone quiet, as if the part of him that prayed had chosen to listen instead. The stars emerged slowly, each one blinking into being as though summoned by invisible hands. The wind stirred, soft and hesitant, and the world settled. Micah sat motionless, eyes wide open, heart still. Then a strange thing happened. Everything stopped, not the way it does in stories, not with a crash of thunder or a blinding light, but gently, slowly, subtly. The wind ceased. The trees stood still. Even the usual chirp of night insects faded. The sheep below did not bleat. The grass no longer rustled. It was as if the world had taken a deep breath and held it. Micah noticed it only because of how unnatural it felt. The silence was not empty. It was full, dense, like standing inside the moment before a word is spoken. Not the word itself, but the waiting. His heart began to beat louder in his ears. Then, without sound, without light, something shifted. A single thought rose inside him, not placed there by his own mind, but as if delivered softly from somewhere else. Be still, that was all. 2 words, not shouted, not thundered, whispered, but not into his ears, into his spirit. And with those 2 words, the heaviness inside him began to melt. Not do something, not seek harder, not try to earn my voice. Just be still. Micah's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from something deeper, a kind of holy recognition. He had not been forgotten. He had not been abandoned. The stillness wasn't punishment. It was invitation. An invitation to stop striving, to rest, to trust that God did not come only in moments of dramatic revelation, but in the hush, in the pause, in the breath between prayers. He lay back in the grass, arms stretched wide, as if to embrace the sky. And for the first time, he didn't ask God for anything. He simply let himself be loved. The next morning, something had changed in the boy, though he didn't speak of it. There were no glowing signs on his skin, no visions to report. He still carried water from the well, still helped his mother sweep the hearth, still sang softly to the sheep in the fields. But those who looked closely might have noticed that his eyes held a deeper peace, as if he had learned something that could not be taught. as if he had touched something no one else could see. The village rabbi, an old man with a beard like falling snow, noticed it one afternoon as Micah sat outside the synagogue, watching the wind in the fig tree. "You've been listening to silence, haven't you?" the rabbi asked gently. Micah nodded. "And what did it say?" The rabbi smiled. Micah looked up, thought for a long moment, and then answered softly. He said, "Be still." The rabbi's eyes glistened, and he placed a weathered hand on Micah's shoulder. "Then you've heard more than many men hear in a lifetime." That evening, back on Quiet Hill, Micah didn't bring a question. He didn't even bring a song. He brought only himself. And as he lay there beneath the canopy of stars, he whispered, not aloud, but with the full weight of his soul, "I don't need to hear your voice to know you're near." The wind stirred once more, soft and sacred, like the turning of a holy page, and in the stillness he smiled. Far above, the stars kept their silent vigil. Far below, a boy had begun to understand the language of heaven, not in words, but in stillness, and sometimes stillness is the greatest prayer of all. The air had grown colder. Nights came more quickly now, sliding across the hills like a silent tide. The stars still appeared, faithful and bright, but they shivered slightly in the wind. Even the animals moved differently, their steps slower, more deliberate, as if they too felt the world drawing inward, folding into itself for the winter. Micah noticed it in the way his breath lingered in the air like smoke, in the way his fingers tingled as he held his staff, in the quiet hunger of the sheep as they searched for what was left of the grass, and in the quiet moments, when the work was done, when the fire had burned low, when the world felt hushed, Micah began to dream. But these were not ordinary dreams. They were not like the flickering, fleeting things that dance behind tired eyelids. They were not the scrambled memories of daily life rearranged into nonsense. They were something more. They felt given, like a gift or a message. The first dream came on a night when the sky was unusually clear. Micah had fallen asleep near the fire, his head resting on a folded cloak. His arms were tucked close to his body, and the sheep were quiet, breathing like a chorus of soft sighs behind him. The stars above watched in their steady silence. In the dream, Micah stood in a wide open field. But it was not his field, not the familiar pastures near Quiet Hill. The grass was taller, wilder. The air was warmer, and golden light spilled over everything like honey. The sky was blue, but not the kind of blue one sees during the day. It was a living blue, as if it were singing. Micah looked down and saw that he was barefoot. He felt no fear, only wonder. And then, from the edge of the field, a figure approached. The figure was clothed in white, but not the white of linen or wool. It shimmered as if woven from morning light and flowing water. The figure's face was hidden, but Micah felt no need to see it. Somehow, he knew this was a messenger, a servant of the Holy One. The figure lifted a hand and pointed, not at Micah, but at the sky. Micah looked up, and there in the heavens, stars began to move. They rearranged themselves like living fireflies, forming a pattern, first a shepherd, then a lamb, then a staff, and finally a heart. And then a voice, not loud, not soft, but deeper than sound, filled the dream. Who watches the sheep by night has been watched since before time began. Micah opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The voice continued, "You are not alone. You have never been alone. Even your silence is heard. Even your stillness speaks." The figure reached out, and though they stood far apart, Micah felt warmth touch his chest, as if a hand had passed through distance and time and gently rested over his heart. The dreams you are given are seeds. The voice whispered, "Wet, watch, listen in time, they will grow." And then, gently, Micah awoke. The fire beside him had dimmed to embers. The wind had quieted. The sheep were still. Micah sat up slowly, his heart full and slow, like a river that had changed course in the night. He looked at the stars above and whispered, "I will wait, I will watch, I will listen." And then somehow that was enough. Over the next few nights, the dreams returned, each one different, each one deeper. In one dream, he stood on a mountain so tall he could see the curve of the earth, and a voice told him, "To be small is not to be unseen." In another, he walked through a valley filled with dry bones, and as he passed, they blossomed into flowers, and a whisper followed him, "Where death is, I bring life." In yet another, he simply floated in darkness, surrounded by stars that pulse like hearts, and he heard the gentlest promise, "You are carried, even when you do not feel the arms that hold you." Micah told no one of these dreams, not because he feared they would not believe him, but because they were too sacred to explain. Like songs only his soul could hear, and yet they began to change him. He walked slower, spoke softer, listened longer. Even the other shepherds began to notice. One boy teased him, calling him the silent prophet, but Micah only smiled. He knew that some truths were not meant to be shouted. Some were meant to be lived. One evening, as he sat alone near the edge of the pasture, watching the wind ripple through the grass, he saw a small lamb wandering from the flock. It was weak, limping, its tiny legs trembling beneath it. Without hesitation, Micah stood and went to it. He knelt beside the lamb, scooped it into his arms, and whispered, "You're not alone." He carried it back to the fold, wrapped it in his own cloak, and placed it near the fire. The lamb bleated softly, then closed its eyes. Micah sat beside it, listening to the wind. Somewhere far beyond the hills, he imagined God doing the same, lifting some weary soul, wrapping it in warmth, whispering the same words, "You're not alone." And in that moment, Micah understood something he had not known before, that the dreams were not just for him. They were not secrets to be stored. They were seeds to be sown. Far above, the stars burned with quiet fire. Far below, a shepherd boy kept watch, not just over sheep, but over the dreams planted within his spirit. And sometimes, the greatest dreams are not the ones we chase, but the ones that come quietly in the night and grow into love. The fire had always comforted him, from the earliest days of childhood, when his mother would draw him close and wrap him in thick woolen shawls, to these quieter nights beneath the open sky. The flicker of flame had become a steady companion. It crackled and whispered in its own language, one older than words. Micah loved to watch the fire, not for its warmth alone, though in the deepening cold of the season it was needed, but because of the way it danced. There was life in it, rhythm, mystery, as if it remembered something that the world had forgotten. He often found himself staring into its heart, losing track of time, and on this particular night, the fire seemed different. It was quieter, somehow, more deliberate. The flames rose with slow elegance, stretching upward as if reaching toward something unseen. The smoke curled in gentle spirals, drifting into the sky like prayers without sound. Micah sat alone, wrapped in his cloak, the sheep sleeping in their fold, the stars hidden behind drifting clouds. The wind had stilled, and the only sound was the crackle and pop of burning olive wood. He had not dreamed in 3 nights. Not since the last vision, the one where a single drop of light had fallen into his hands and turned into a seed. He had woken with tears on his cheeks and a deep longing in his chest, a hunger for more. but not the kind that could be satisfied by bread. He missed the dreams, not for the images alone, but for the feeling, that strange and holy sense that God was near, whispering through the veil between the worlds. He leaned forward now, eyes fixed on the fire. "Where are you?" he whispered aloud. There was no reply, only the soft hiss of flame and the occasional crack of sap within the wood. Micah closed his eyes, and then something changed. He couldn't say what or how, but the space around him felt thicker. He opened his eyes and saw that the fire had grown, not brighter, but deeper. The flames were taller, but did not consume the logs. The glow cast a strange light, golden and steady, that did not flicker. It lit the ground in circles, and those circles shimmered faintly, like ripples in water. Micah didn't move. His breath caught in his throat, and then from the heart of the fire came a voice. It was not a voice made of sound, and yet it filled the space like music fills a room. It came not through his ears, but through his very being. Every part of him heard it. Bones, blood, breath. It was a voice of weight and wonder, yet softer than the fall of snow. Micah. Just his name, spoken as only one could speak it, with complete knowing, complete love. "I am here." Micah's eyes filled with tears. He could not speak, could not move. But the silence that rose within him was not fear, it was awe. And the voice continued, "You seek me in wind, in stars, in dreams. But I am not bound to sky or season. I am not a visitor who comes and goes. I am always." Micah bowed his head, trembling. The voice wrapped around him like a blanket made of morning light. "I speak through fire, through stillness, through lambs and wind and even silence. But you must learn to see with more than eyes, hear with more than ears, trust with more than thoughts." Micah opened his hands, palms up, as if to receive something. "I want to," he whispered. "Then listen, child, not just to me, but to what I have placed within you." The fire pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and for a moment, Micah saw something beyond the flames. It was not a vision, not quite, but he felt it. A glimpse of the great weaving, the tapestry of all things. He saw threads connecting people to each other, events to outcomes, pain to healing, waiting to fulfillment. And running through it all, like the purest golden thread, was love, endless, patient, eternal love. It did not force, it did not demand, it simply was. Micah wept. He wept not because he was sad, but because he had touched something too big for words. And the voice, as if reading his very soul, said, "Let your life become a fire that listens." Micah didn't know what it meant, not fully, but he nodded. Yes. The flames returned to normal. The night settled once again. The sheep stirred in their sleep. A breeze picked up, cool and faintly sweet, as if it had passed over distant mountains. The stars blinked through the parting clouds, and Micah sat beside the fire, heart full and still, like a vessel that had just been filled to the brim. He didn't need to chase the voice, didn't need to beg for another word, because now he knew. God didn't only speak in dreams, he spoke in fire, in silence, in names whispered at just the right moment. And from that night on, Micah tended the fire with a deeper care. He saw in every flicker a possibility, in every flame a whisper, in every ember a reminder that even what seems to die still glows with hidden life. And as others came and sat near his fire, travelers, shepherds, children, they found themselves drawn into the warmth, the stillness, the peace. They did not know why they stayed longer than planned, why their hearts felt lighter, why their thoughts grew quieter. But Micah knew the fire was no longer just wood and flame. It had become a place of presence, a quiet altar beneath the stars far above. The constellations resumed their eternal turning. Far below, a shepherd boy listened not with ears, but with spirit. And sometimes God does not answer with thunder. He answers with a name, spoken from the fire. The morning broke slowly. A pale light crept across the horizon, brushing the hills with silver. Frost clung to the grass like delicate lace, and the breath of the sheep rose in soft clouds as they stirred in the fold. Micah stood quietly at the edge of the pasture, watching the sky change colors like a slowly turning page. He had not slept much. The memory of the voice in the fire still pulsed within him, quiet and bright like an ember that refused to die. He felt different now, not louder, not stronger, but anchored. And as he stood there, watching the morning unfold, he noticed something odd, a figure, far off, moving slowly through the mist, not from the village, not from the hills, from the east. Micah narrowed his eyes. The figure was leading a camel, tall, deliberate, with decorated saddlebags and golden fabric glinting faintly in the early light. The man's robe shimmered faintly with deep indigo and red embroidery. He walked with the grace of someone who had traveled far and long and was in no hurry to arrive. Micah felt a quiet nudge in his heart, so he waited. The traveler approached with calm, rhythmic steps. He stopped just beyond the stone wall of the sheepfold, removed his scarf, and smiled. "Peace to you, keeper of the flock," the man said in a rich, gentle voice. Micah stepped forward and bowed slightly. "And to you, traveler of the dawn." The man's eyes twinkled. "So they speak poetry on these hills." Micah smiled faintly, only when the silence grows too deep. The man nodded, approving. "Then perhaps this is the right place." They shared bread and water near the fire, which Micah had stirred back to life. The flames rose gently, and the traveler's face glowed with warmth and quiet wisdom. Micah studied him. He was not old, but there was age in his gaze, the kind that comes not from years, but from miles. There were scrolls tucked into his saddlebag, tiny jars of strange spices, a small harp, a star chart drawn on silk. "You've come far," Micah said softly. The traveler nodded. "From lands where the rivers run wide and the sand sings beneath your feet. I've crossed deserts that remember ancient voices, and mountains where the stars hang so close you feel you could touch them." Micah tilted his head. "And why come here, to this quiet place?" The traveler looked into the fire, and for a moment, his face was shadowed with something ancient. He said, "And a star." Micah's breath caught. "A star." The traveler nodded slowly. "Not just any star. One that is new. One that does not belong to the old stories of the sky." It appeared above the eastern horizon, not burning like the others, but humming, speaking even. Micah leaned closer, heart quickening. What did it say? The traveler closed his eyes, as if recalling the sound not with ears but with spirit. It said, "Is coming." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Micah. "The one your prophets have whispered about. The one who will walk with dust on his feet and divinity in his breath. The one who will gather the lost like lambs and speak peace to storms." The fire cracked. Micah felt the world still around him. He had heard such promises since childhood, in prayers, in stories, in the soft weeping of mothers who waited. But now, here was a man from beyond the horizon, repeating them with trembling certainty. "And you're following this star?" Micah asked. "I am, but not alone." The traveler gestured eastward. "There are others. Wise men seekers? Some from kingdoms, some from wilderness. All drawn by the same light. We do not know when or where exactly, but we know this something holy has entered the world, and the world will never be the same." Micah stared into the flames, the memory of the voice in the fire echoing within him. Let your life become a fire that listens. He looked at the traveler. You should rest, Micah said gently. There is water here, food, and quiet. The man smiled. You are kind. He removed a small box from his pack and placed it before Micah, he said. Micah hesitated. Why? The man's eyes softened. Because I see it in you. The same light, faint now, but growing. You are not just watching the fields. You are watching for him. Micah opened the box. Inside was a small vial of frankincense. The scent rose like a memory, sweet, deep, and otherworldly. The traveler bowed. When the night feels long, let this remind you, the king is coming. That night, after the traveler had gone, walking westward into the hills, vanishing like a vision, Micah sat by the fire once more. The stars were out, and he searched them, wondering which one it was. The new one, the promised one. He didn't know where this child would be born. He didn't know when, but he knew it was near, and he whispered aloud, Come soon, Lord, we are waiting. Afar above, a new star pulsed softly, unseen by most, but unmistakable to the faithful. Far below, a shepherd boy kept watch, not just over his sheep, but over a world about to change. And sometimes, God sends whispers from distant lands, carrying the scent of prophecy and the echo of footsteps that are drawing ever closer. The sky changed without warning. One moment, it was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across a velvet night. The next, clouds rolled in like marching giants, heavy and fast, swallowing the stars whole. The wind rose sharp and cold, bending the olive branches like fragile reeds. Micah stood from his place by the fire, eyes scanning the hills. Storms were not uncommon in these parts, but this one felt different, like a shadow that had teeth. He hurried to secure the sheep in their fold, murmuring soft words to calm them. The animals were restless, picking up on something unseen. Lightning flickered beyond the hills, distant, but drawing closer. Then came the sound, not thunder, not wind, but footsteps. Running, heavy, desperate. Micah turned just as a figure stumbled into the clearing, soaked, gasping, eyes wild. A man clothed in torn rags, with blood at his temple and a blade in his belt. Micah took a cautious step back. The man raised his hands, but it was not in peace. It was in warning. Don't move, the stranger rasped. His voice was like gravel soaked in rain. Don't say a word. Micah froze. The man's eyes darted around, to the sheep, the bags, the fire. He was searching for something, anything of value. I just need food, he said quickly. Water, maybe a place to wait out the storm. Micah remained still, heart pounding. He saw it in the man's face, hunger, yes, exhaustion, but also fear, not of the weather, of being found. You're running? Micah said softly. The man flinched. You don't know me. No. But I know that look. The stranger stepped closer, his hand twitching toward the blade. I've done nothing wrong. Micah held his gaze. Then why are you afraid? A long silence. Then the man sank to his knees, shoulders shaking. The storm howled behind them, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. I didn't mean to hurt him, he whispered. He found me stealing bread. He grabbed me. I just pushed him. I didn't know he would hit his head. He buried his face in his hands. I didn't want this. Micah approached slowly. You're not the first to run from guilt, he said gently. You won't be the last. The man looked up, his eyes wet with more than rain. Are you going to turn me in? Micah looked toward the fire, where the flames still burned steady despite the wind. Then back at the man. No. They sat beneath the shelter Micah had built, little more than a low canopy of branches and stones. But it held the rain off just enough. The fire crackled between them, warming hands that had once stolen. The man introduced himself quietly. Jareth. Micah nodded. Micah. For a while, they said nothing. The storm roared, shaking the hills like the breath of some ancient beast. But within the circle of the fire, there was peace, or something close to it. Jareth stared into the flames. I used to believe in God, he said, voice rough. When I was a child, before everything broke. What broke? Micah asked. My father died. My mother left. The town turned cold. I learned quick the world doesn't give. You take what you need, or you starve. Micah listened. Jareth's voice lowered. But then tonight the sky changed, and I saw your fire from the hill. I thought maybe I could just sit beside it and not feel hunted. Just for one night. He looked at Micah, almost pleading. I don't want to be this man. Micah leaned forward. You're not. Jareth shook his head. You don't know what I've done. Micah touched the vial of frankincense still hidden in his pouch. The gift from the traveler. Its scent lingered faintly in the air, sweet and forgiving. I don't need to know, Micah said, but I do know this. Sometimes God speaks through the storm. Jareth looked up. Micah continued, slowly. Is not only found in dreams or holy temples. Sometimes he sits beside thieves. Sometimes he builds altars out of broken men, and sometimes he glanced at the fire. He waits for us to stop running. The storm raged for hours, but the fire never died, and by morning, the world was washed clean. The hills steamed gently in the sun, the grass sparkling with dew. Birds returned to the trees, singing tentative songs. Jareth stood at the edge of the pasture, the sheep grazing nearby. He turned to Micah. I have to go. Micah nodded. You have to choose. Jareth held out the blade. I won't need this anymore. Micah took it silently. Jareth hesitated, then reached into his coat and drew out a single coin. Large, old, worn with time. He placed it in Micah's hand. For the bread, he said. Then he walked into the light. That night, Micah held the coin in his palm, turning it over again and again. He thought of how close the fire had come to being extinguished, how close the thief had come to losing himself, how close he had come to fear, and how somehow mercy had spoken louder than justice. He thought, the storm is not the punishment. Sometimes it's the invitation. Far above, the clouds parted completely, revealing the heavens in full glory. Far below, a thief walked toward redemption, and a shepherd stayed awake beside his fire. And sometimes God arrives not in robes of glory, but in the shaking hands of a stranger, asking for grace. Micah lay down beneath the stars, the quiet murmur of the wind his only companion. The night had been peaceful, the storm long gone, and the world around him seemed to breathe in a rhythm of its own. The sheep were settled, the fire reduced to a quiet glow, and for the first time in many days, his heart felt calm. But still sleep did not come easily. There was something unsettled within him, something restless, a longing that gnawed at his soul, a question that had no answer. He closed his eyes, hoping for a few moments of peace. But instead of sleep, a vision took hold of him. It began softly like a whisper carried on the wind. A flicker of light in the distance, and then the dream unfolded. He was standing in a vast, open field. The ground beneath him was soft with grass, and the sky above stretched endlessly, dark and deep, like the soul of the world itself. There was no wind, no noise, only stillness, and in the center of the field, rising high into the heavens, stood a ladder. It was not like any ladder Micah had ever seen. It was made of light glowing with a soft, golden hue. Each step shimmered with a radiance that seemed to draw his eyes upward, far beyond the clouds. The ladder stretched upward, disappearing into the very heart of the sky, as if it were connected to the stars themselves. And standing at the base of the ladder, watching the endless rise of it, was a figure, clothed in robes of white, with eyes like stars. The figure did not speak, but somehow Micah knew it was waiting for him. He began to climb. With each step, he felt his heart grow lighter. The rungs of the ladder seemed to hum with a quiet song, a melody that filled him from the inside out, as if it were attuned to his very soul. The air grew thinner as he rose, but with each breath, he felt a sense of peace, a closeness to something ancient and eternal. The ground below seemed to fall away, and soon there was nothing but the ladder, stretching higher and higher into the unknown. Micah did not look back. He knew there was no need to. The ladder was all that mattered now. And as he climbed, a voice came, not from the figure below, but from the very air around him. It was a voice that seemed to carry the weight of all time, a voice that spoke not in words, but in knowing. This is the way, Micah, the way of the faithful, the way of the one who seeks. Micah's heart swelled with a mixture of wonder and fear. He didn't know where the ladder was leading, or what awaited him at the top, but he knew with absolute certainty that this was a journey he had been born to take. It is the way of those who walk not by sight, but by faith. He climbed higher, and the ladder began to shift, the rungs stretching and narrowing, twisting in a way that felt like a dance, as if the very path was alive. His hands gripped the glowing steps, and his feet found their place with ease. There was no doubt now, no hesitation. He was certain of the path. The air grew warmer as he neared the top, and the light around him intensified. The stars above were no longer distant. They were close, so close he felt they were within reach. The light of the ladder became so bright that it filled the sky, and Micah could no longer see where the earth ended and the heavens began. Everything was wrapped in the same golden glow, and at the top of the ladder there was a doorway. It was not a door made of wood or stone, but of light, soft, radiant, and inviting. The figure stood before it, arms outstretched, waiting. Micah stepped forward, but as he did, a shadow moved across his path. It was fleeting at first, like the shadow of a cloud passing across the sun. But as it grew closer, Micah felt the cold bite of fear, the kind of fear that comes when something precious is threatened. The shadow was no longer a cloud. It was a figure, dark, silent, and watching. "Don't go," it whispered. "It is not your time." Micah's heart thudded painfully in his chest. The voice was familiar yet distorted, as if it were a reflection of something he had once known. A voice from his past, from the times when doubt and despair had clouded his thoughts. It was the voice of fear. It was the voice of all the things he had left behind, all the things he had feared he could not overcome. And yet, the ladder still glowed before him. The light still beckoned. "This is the way," the voice said again, but this time it was not from the shadow. It was from the figure above, the one clothed in light. Micah took a step forward, and the shadow wavered. The figure in the light reached out, and as Micah's fingers touched the door, the shadow dissolved, melting into the brightness. Micah stepped through, and on the other side was a land unlike any he had ever seen. The air was warm, filled with the scent of flowers and the sound of soft winds. The sky above was golden, like the light of 1,000 sunrises, and in the distance he saw a city, not built of stone or brick, but of light, shining brighter than anything he had ever imagined. The figure stood beside him, smiling. "This is the place," the figure said. "This is the kingdom you seek. It is always there, waiting for those who walk the way of faith." Micah looked around, his heart overflowing with joy. "Is it real?" The figure nodded. "It is real in ways you cannot yet understand, but it is always waiting for you." And then the figure placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were always meant to find the way." Again and again. Micah woke with a start. His breath was shallow, his body covered in sweat. The night was still, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. But the dream was with him still. He sat up slowly, heart racing. It had felt so real, so vivid. The ladder, the light, the figure. He could still feel the warmth of the light on his skin, still hear the soft hum of the rungs beneath his feet. And then, in the silence of the night, he heard a voice. It was the same voice from the dream, soft, gentle. "You are not alone, Micah. The way is before you." Micah closed his eyes, a smile touching his lips. The ladder was real, the way was real, and no matter where his journey took him, he knew he would never have to walk it alone. Far above, the heavens continued their endless dance, stars flickering like whispers in the dark. Far below, a shepherd lay beneath the stars, knowing that the way of faith was not a path of sight, but one of trust. And sometimes, the ladder reaches down, not for the strong or the mighty, but for those who choose to climb, step by step, into the light. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over the hills as Micah walked. His steps were steady, the weight of the journey no longer pressing upon him as it had before. The storm was long past, and the days seemed to unfold with a quiet rhythm. The rhythm of a man who had seen the worst, and now found peace in the simplest things. But even in the midst of his newfound peace, there was something still lingering within him, something he could not yet grasp, a whisper in his heart that beckoned him to keep moving forward. It was early morning when he reached the edge of the forest. The trees, thick with foliage, whispered in the breeze. The path before him grew narrower, winding deeper into the woods until it seemed to disappear entirely. And yet, Micah knew he must follow. The whisper was louder now, clearer. It was not a voice in the air, but one in his soul urging him onward. He did not know where he was going, but he knew he could not stop. His feet carried him forward, past the trees, into a valley where the earth seemed softer, more fertile. The air was cool and fresh here, filled with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. It was a place of quiet solitude, where time seemed to slow, and the only sounds were the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant song of a bird. And then he saw it. In the heart of the valley, hidden by tall grasses and vines, was an ancient well. Its stone walls were weathered with age, moss clinging to the cracks like the gentle embrace of time itself. The stone rim, once smooth, was now roughened by the passage of countless years. Water bubbled up from the depths, a crystal, clear stream flowing from the well's mouth, spilling out into a small, clear pool at its base. It was a well like no other. Micah approached cautiously, his feet sinking into the soft earth with each step. He knelt beside the well, gazing down into the water. The surface was calm, reflecting the sky above like a mirror. But as he leaned closer, he saw something more. The water seemed to shimmer with a light of its own, a soft inner glow that pulsed with an ancient rhythm. The whisper in his heart grew louder. He closed his eyes, leaning forward until his hands rested gently on the stone rim of the well. A deep breath filled his lungs, and as he exhaled, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over him. The air was thick with a quiet holiness, as if this place had always been sacred. And then he heard it. Come. The voice was not loud, but it was clear, like the sound of a distant bell ringing softly in the stillness. It was the same voice he had heard before. The voice that had called him to the ladder, to the journey. It was the voice of the one who had always been with him, even when he could not see. Micah hesitated for a moment, but then something inside him stirred. He reached out, dipping his hands into the cool water. The moment his fingers touched the surface, a wave of light surged upward from the depths of the well. It was not a physical light, but a spiritual one, a warmth that filled his soul with a profound sense of renewal. The water seemed to pulse beneath his hands, each beat like the rhythm of his own heart. "This is the well of living water," the voice said softly, echoing in the depths of the well. "Drink, and you will never thirst again." Micah's heart raced. He looked at the water in his hands, pure, clear, and radiant with an inner light. Without thinking, he brought it to his lips, the coolness of it refreshing, as though he had never tasted anything so life-giving. The moment the water touched his tongue, a flood of understanding swept over him. It was as if all the questions he had carried with him, all the burdens, all the doubts, all the fears, melted away. The water did not simply quench his physical thirst. It cleansed him, renewing him from the inside out. He drank again, deeper this time, and again the sense of peace washed over him, this time accompanied by a deep, abiding joy. It was as though the very essence of life had been poured into him. The water was not just water. It was the Spirit of God, filling him completely, refreshing every part of his being. And as he drank, he felt the ground beneath him shift. He stood up, his body trembling with the sensation of something holy moving through him. His eyes lifted to the sky above, and for the first time, he understood. This was not just a well of water, but a well of life. A well that had always been there, waiting for those who sought it, waiting to offer its gift to those who would receive it. "The water you drink here is not of this world," the voice said, softer now. "It is the water of eternal life, the gift I give to those who seek. Drink and know that you are healed." For a long while, Micah stood beside the well, letting the light of the water fill him completely. The whispering winds around him seemed to carry the words of the voice, reminding him of the journey he had walked, the faith he had found, the doubts he had overcome, and the love that had always been there, waiting for him. He did not know how long he stayed by the well, but when he finally turned to leave, he felt different. The burdens that had weighed upon him, the doubts, the guilt, the uncertainty, all of it seemed to have been washed away in the living water. The world around him felt brighter, more alive, and within him there was a wellspring of peace that could not be shaken. As he made his way back through the valley, the whisper in his heart remained steady and unbroken. "You have found the well, and now you are the well." Micah smiled softly, understanding at last the journey was far from over. But now it felt different. He had drunk from the well of living water, and with that, he had received the gift of life, eternal and abundant. And as he walked, he knew that no matter where his path would lead, the water would always be with him, deep within, flowing through him, sustaining him, and carrying him forward step by step into the light. Far above, the stars shone brightly, steady and true, like the promises of God. Far below, a man walked through the world, renewed by the water of life, knowing that he would never thirst again. And sometimes God calls us to drink, not from the wells of the world, but from the eternal waters that flow from his heart everlasting. The days passed quietly after Micah had drunk from the well of living water. The world around him seemed to glow with a soft, golden light, as though the very air was imbued with the blessings of the Spirit. His heart, once heavy with doubts and fears, now felt light, like a bird soaring freely in the wind. Yet, despite the peace that filled him, there was a longing that stirred deep within his soul. It was a longing not for himself, but for others. Micah had always been a shepherd, watching over his flock with care and tenderness, guiding them through the fields and valleys. But now, he felt a deeper calling, one that went beyond the mere tending of sheep. He knew there were others who were lost, others who needed the same guidance and peace that he had found. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and lavender, Micah sat by the fire, his gaze distant as the flames danced in the twilight. And then, from the depths of his heart, a song began to rise. It was soft at first, like the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind, but soon it grew stronger, richer, and fuller. It was a song of hope, a song of healing, a song of the love of God that poured into every corner of the earth. Micah had never sung like this before. The words flowed from his lips, unbidden, as though the Spirit itself was speaking through him. And as he sang, he felt the presence of God all around him, as though the very air itself was alive with divine energy. The song was simple, but its message was profound. It spoke of God's love that never fails, of His guidance that never wavers. It spoke of the way through the darkness, the path to light, the promise of peace for those who seek. Come to the still waters, rest in the shade of the tree, for I am your shepherd, and I will set you free. The winds will blow, the storm will rage, but I will guide you through every age. You are never alone, for I am with you always. My love will never fade. It will carry you all your days. As the song filled the night air, something miraculous happened. The sheep that had been grazing in the distance gathered around, drawn by the soothing melody. Their soft bleats mixed with the gentle rhythm of the song, as though they too were offering their praise to the one who had called them all. But it was not just the sheep. As the song spread through the valley, Micah noticed that other creatures of the forest began to gather around the fire. Birds, deer, and even the wind seemed to still in response to the song. And then, in the distance, he saw a figure. A man, standing at the edge of the trees, watching him. At first, Micah thought he might be mistaken, but as the man drew closer, he saw the longing in his eyes. The figure was weary, his clothes tattered, his face etched with the wear of many hardships. He looked like someone who had been searching for something, but did not know where to find it. Micah's heart swelled with compassion, and without thinking, he stood and approached the man. Micah said softly, his voice still carrying the melody of the song, "Come and rest. There is peace here." The man looked at him with a mixture of confusion and hope, as if he had not expected to find such kindness. But after a moment of hesitation, he stepped forward, walking toward the fire. As the man sat beside him, Micah continued to sing, his voice now calm and steady. The man listened quietly, his weary body relaxing in the warmth of the fire and the presence of the song. And as Micah sang, he realized something profound. The song was not just for him. It was for all who heard it, for those who were lost and searching, for those who were burdened and weary, for those who needed to hear the voice of God, calling them to rest in His love. The song was the shepherd's song, the song of the one who would never leave his flock, the song of the one who would guide them through every trial and every storm. As the night deepened, the fire crackled and the song continued, soft and steady, like the pulse of the earth itself. The man beside him closed his eyes, his breathing slow and even, as though the weight of his struggles had lifted. And all around them, the creatures of the forest seemed to listen, drawn to the peace that had settled over the valley. Micah finished the song, his voice a whisper now, and sat quietly beside the man. The night was still, save for the gentle rustling of the trees and the distant song of the birds. After a long silence, the man spoke. "I have been searching," he said, his voice low and rough. "Searching for peace, searching for something to fill the emptiness inside." Micah nodded, understanding all too well. "You have found it," he said softly. "The peace you seek is not far away. It is here in this moment, in the love of the one who calls you his own." The man looked at him, his eyes filled with wonder. "Is it really that simple?" Micah smiled. "Yes, it is simple, but it is not easy. But it is worth it." The man stayed with Micah through the night, and as the morning sun rose once more, he stood and stretched, a renewed light in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for the song. Thank you for showing me the way." Micah smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "Go in peace," he said, his voice steady and sure. "And remember the song. Let it be a light for you on your journey." The man walked away, and Micah sat back down by the fire, his heart full. He had given the man peace, but in truth, it was the song that had done the work. The song was the message of hope, of faith, of the unbreakable love of God. And as the day unfolded before him, Micah realized something deeper. The song was not just for the man. It was for everyone who would listen. It was the song that would guide others, the song that would lead the lost back to the fold. He, too, was a shepherd, and he had been given a voice to sing the song of the one who cared for all. The shepherd's song was the song of love, and the song of guidance, and the song of hope for all who would hear. Far above, the stars blinked softly in the sky, like the eyes of a shepherd watching over his flock. Far below, a man sat by the fire, his heart singing a new song, one of peace, one of light, and one of love. And sometimes, the shepherd sings not with words alone, but with the melody of his heart, calling each of us to follow and to find the peace we seek. The days had grown shorter, the sun sinking lower in the sky each evening, casting longer shadows over the earth. Micah felt a shift within himself. It was as if the peace he had found was not meant to last forever in the way he had imagined. There was something else, a path he had yet to walk, a challenge yet to face. One morning, after a long and restful night by the fire, Micah awoke with a sense of unease, as though something was calling him. The winds had changed, and with them came a subtle warning, a whisper in his heart that told him it was time to continue his journey. He rose slowly, his gaze wandering over the quiet landscape. The valley stretched out before him, bathed in the pale light of dawn. There was something about this morning that felt different, something heavier in the air, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. And then he saw it. At the far end of the valley, where the light seemed to falter and the shadows grew long, there stood a narrow path, winding its way into a deep, dark gorge. The trees along the path were gnarled and twisted, their branches heavy with a strange, suffocating darkness. The wind, once gentle and refreshing, now carried with it a chill that sent a shiver down Micah's spine. He knew, without a doubt, that this was the path he had to walk. With a deep breath, Micah began his journey toward the valley. The farther he walked, the more the air seemed to grow thick, heavy with an almost palpable fear. The trees, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes, seemed to lean in toward him, as though watching, waiting. The ground beneath his feet was uneven and treacherous, the path narrow and winding. The whispers of the wind seemed to grow louder now, but they were not gentle whispers. These were voices of doubt and fear, voices that spoke of failure and defeat, of the dangers that lay ahead. Micah's heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in many days, he felt the old weight of fear creep into his mind. "Turn back," the voice whispered. "This path is too dark, too dangerous. You are not strong enough." Micah's breath quickened, but he did not stop. He had walked this far, and he knew the way forward was the only way to continue. The path through the valley was the path he must take, no matter how dark or uncertain it seemed. The deeper he ventured into the valley, the more oppressive the darkness became. The sky overhead was hidden behind thick clouds, and the shadows of the trees stretched out like dark fingers, reaching for him. The sounds of the forest had faded, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against his ears. Even the wind seemed to be still, as though it was holding its breath. The path before him became steeper, and he stumbled, his foot catching on a root hidden in the darkness. He fell to his knees, his palms scraping against the rough earth. For a moment, he lay there, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. The fear inside him grew, threatening to overwhelm him. But then something within him stirred, a quiet whisper, the same voice that had called him all those days ago. "Do not fear, Micah, for I am with you, even here." The words were soft, but they were enough to steady him. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his hands trembling as he wiped the dirt from his knees. The darkness around him was still thick, but he could feel the presence of God beside him, like a steady hand on his shoulder, guiding him forward. With renewed strength, Micah continued his journey, each step a struggle against the growing fear. The voices of doubt continued to echo in his mind, but he no longer listened. He focused instead on the whisper of God's voice, on the promise that he would never leave him, no matter how dark the path became. As he moved deeper into the valley, the darkness grew more suffocating. The path was narrow now, barely wide enough for him to pass through. The shadows seemed to close in on him, and his own breath sounded loud in the stillness. In the distance, he saw a flicker of light, a tiny, distant flame that seemed to beckon him forward. It was the light of hope, the light of the presence of God, shining in the midst of the darkness. But as he moved toward it, the shadows seemed to stretch out even further, blocking his way. The voices of doubt grew louder, more insistent. They said, "It is too far, you are to turn back." For a moment, Micah wavered. His body felt heavy, his steps slow, and the light ahead seemed to grow fainter. The fear threatened to consume him, and he wondered if he would ever reach the end of this valley. But then, he remembered the words of the shepherd's song, the song that had guided him through so much. The words whispered in his heart once more, "I am your shepherd, and I will guide you through the storm. I will not leave you in the darkness." Micah's steps grew steadier, and he lifted his head. The light ahead seemed to shine brighter now, cutting through the shadows like a beacon in the night. He took a deep breath, and with each step, he moved closer. And then, just when the darkness seemed to reach its peak, he stepped into the light. The instant he crossed the threshold, the valley seemed to open up before him. The dark shadows receded, and the heavy weight that had pressed against his chest was lifted. The air was fresh and clear, and the path before him widened, leading into a bright, open field bathed in golden light. Micah stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, as though he had emerged from a long and terrible dream. The peace he had once known returned, filling him completely. And as he looked around, he saw the valley behind him, dark and foreboding, but now distant, as though it had always been a place he was meant to pass through. He had walked through the valley of shadows, and though it had been hard, though it had been painful, he had made it through. He had trusted in the voice of God, and that trust had led him out of the darkness. And as Micah stood there in the light, he understood. The valley was not a place to fear. It was a place of transformation. The shadows that had surrounded him were not obstacles to his journey, but tests. Tests of his faith, tests of his trust in the one who called him. And as he looked ahead, he knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more valleys, more challenges, more darkness to face. But with each step, he would grow stronger. With each trial, he would be closer to the light. For the path of faith is not always easy, but it is always worth it. Far above, the stars shone brightly, like the light of God, steady and unchanging. Far below, a man stood in the light, his heart filled with peace, knowing that no matter the darkness, the light would always lead him home. And sometimes, God calls us to walk through the valley, not to be swallowed by the darkness, but to emerge into the light, stronger and more faithful, knowing that He walks with us every step of the way. The sun had risen higher, and the days had grown warmer. But Micah felt an unsettled stirring in his spirit. The peace he had discovered in the valley had not left him, but now, as the days stretched on, there was a deeper yearning within him, a calling distant but clear. It was the same voice, the same whisper, that had guided him all along. But this time it was different. It was not a voice of comfort, but a voice of invitation. An invitation to climb higher, to journey farther, and to seek the ultimate communion with God. One evening, as Micah sat beneath a tree by the edge of a river, he looked up at the distant horizon. Far in the distance, beyond the rolling hills, stood a great mountain, its peak hidden in the clouds. The mountain called to him, its majesty both awe-inspiring and intimidating. It was the mountain of the Lord, and it loomed over the land like a silent witness, its summit reaching toward the heavens. Micah knew this was the next step on his journey. The path would not be easy, but it was the path he was meant to take. The morning came with a fresh wind, and Micah set out toward the mountain. The road was rugged, and the earth beneath his feet was uneven, but he pressed on. With each step, he felt both a sense of anticipation and trepidation. He had walked through the valley, but this was something else. The mountain of the Lord was not just a physical place, it was a spiritual summit, a place where only those who were truly ready could reach. It was a place where God's presence would be felt in ways that were beyond comprehension. As he began his ascent, the path grew steeper and the air thinner. The mountain was vast, and the climb seemed endless. The ground was rocky, and each step required more effort than the last. But Micah did not turn back. He knew that this was his destiny. As the climb continued, the wind picked up, howling through the valleys and rushing around him. The mountain, with its towering peaks and deep ravines, seemed alive, its very essence pulsing with the energy of creation. It was a place where the earth met the sky, and Micah could feel the presence of God, both distant and close, watching over him every step of the way. But with this sense of awe came an overwhelming fear. The mountain was so tall, so unyielding, and Micah could not help but feel small in its presence. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. The sounds of the world below grew faint, and the air became colder. The shadows of the mountain grew longer, casting a dark veil over the path before him. The climb was exhausting, His muscles ached, his breath came in ragged gasps, and doubt began to creep into his mind. Was he truly worthy of reaching the summit? Could he, a simple shepherd, stand before God himself? Who am I? Micah whispered to himself. To stand before the Lord. The wind seemed to answer, though not in words, but in a deep, reassuring presence that swept over him, calming his troubled heart. The voice of God whispered in the silence, a quiet but firm assurance. You are mine, the voice said, and that is enough. With these words, Micah's heart steadied. He pressed on, one step at a time, his eyes fixed on the summit. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the mountain, he reached a plateau. The path had become so steep that it was no longer possible to continue without resting. Micah sat down, his legs trembling from the exertion. His body was weary, but his spirit was stirred. In the quiet of the evening, with the mountain stretching endlessly above him, Micah felt a deep peace settle within. It was a peace that transcended the physical struggle, a peace that filled the deepest corners of his soul. It was a peace that could only come from God. As he sat in stillness, the sky above him began to shift. The clouds parted slightly, revealing the first stars of the evening. And as he looked up, something extraordinary happened. A bright light appeared, shining down from the heavens. It was not the light of the sun, but something far more glorious, far more divine. The light enveloped Micah, filling him with warmth, with love, with a sense of belonging that he had never known before. It was the presence of God, descending from his holy mountain to meet him. Micah fell to his knees, overcome by the intensity of the moment. The light was blinding, yet it did not hurt. Instead, it filled him with an overwhelming sense of peace and reverence. In that moment, Micah understood something he had never known before. The climb up the mountain had been hard, and it had been painful. The doubts, the fears, the physical exhaustion, all of it had been a test. But it was a test that had purified him, a test that had prepared him for this moment, for this encounter with the divine. You have climbed this mountain. The voice of God spoke, as if from the very light that enveloped him. You have walked this path, not in your strength, but in mine. And now you stand in my presence. The light dimmed slightly, and before Micah stood a figure, radiant and majestic, the very embodiment of divine glory. It was as though he were standing in the presence of the Creator himself. But in the face of this awe-inspiring being, Micah felt no fear, only overwhelming love. The figure spoke, and Micah could hear the words in his heart, as though they were engraved upon his soul. You have walked the path of faith, Micah. You have climbed the mountain not for yourself, but for the world around you. And now I send you to be my messenger, to carry my light to those in darkness. Micah's heart soared with both joy and humility. He was but a humble shepherd, yet God had called him to something far greater than he could have ever imagined. Go forth and tell the world of my love, the figure said. Tell them that I am with them always, that even in the darkest places, my light will shine. Micah bowed low, tears welling in his eyes. He had found what he had been searching for, not just peace, but purpose. His journey was not over, it had only just begun. As the light began to fade, the figure disappeared, leaving Micah standing alone on the mountaintop. But he was not truly alone. The presence of God lingered with him, an unseen but ever-present companion. And as Micah stood there, gazing out over the vast world below, he understood that the mountain of the Lord was not just a physical place. It was a journey of the heart, a journey of faith and trust in God. It was a place where the soul could be refined, where the spirit could be made whole, And as he descended the mountain, carrying with him the light of God's love, Micah knew that he would never be the same again. The climb had transformed him, and he was now ready to share that transformation with the world. For in the presence of God, every mountain could be climbed, and every darkness could be overcome. Far above, the stars shone brightly, as though watching over the earth with loving eyes. Far below, a man descended the mountain, his heart filled with the light of God's presence, ready to carry that light to the ends of the earth. And sometimes God calls us to climb the mountain, not for the summit alone, but for the journey of transformation, to emerge as His messengers, carrying His light into a world in need of hope. Micah stood on the mountaintop, gazing at the vast world below him, his heart filled with a peace and fulfillment like never before. The trials and challenges he had endured along the way now seemed like they had all been preparing him for this very moment. God's voice still echoed in his heart, reminding him that every hardship had a deep purpose, and in the end, all darkness would be driven away by the light. The wind blew gently around him, almost as if it were God's own comfort. Micah closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew it was time to return, back to the place he had once called home, to the people he had known before. But this time he was not the same man. He was no longer the weary traveler, lost and uncertain. He was now filled with the certainty that God walked with him, and his heart was no longer filled with confusion or fear. When Micah returned to the village, he noticed that everything seemed different. The people went about their daily lives, just as they always had, unaware of the transformation he had experienced. Yet within him, there was a deep, undeniable change. The road he had once walked alone now seemed less foreign, for he knew that God's love was with him, surrounding him at every step. He walked into the village square, where a group of farmers were working, their faces worn with fatigue and confusion, as if carrying an endless burden in silence. Micah stopped and smiled softly. He felt a deep compassion for them, seeing in their eyes the same struggles he had once known. Like him, they were searching for something, though they may not have realized that the answer was already with them, waiting to be discovered. And so, Micah began to speak with them, sharing the insights he had gained on the mountain. He did not preach or try to persuade them, but instead told them of his journey, of the divine revelations that had filled his heart and shown him the true source of strength and courage. He spoke of how, once bound by fear and doubt, he now understood that it was God's presence that had carried him from darkness into light. One of the elders of the village came forward, his face etched with age and weariness, yet his eyes gleaming with a longing hope. "You speak of God's love as the path to light, but how can we see His presence in our everyday lives?" The elder asked, his voice filled with both confusion and yearning. Micah smiled gently and looked down at his hands, now strong and steady from his journey. He did not answer immediately, but instead pointed to the distant mountains, where the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden rays across the land. "Just like that mountain," Micah said, "each of us is searching for our path, but the true light is not far away. It's within us. When we open our hearts and listen to God's voice, He will guide us." The elder paused, reflecting on these words before slowly nodding in understanding. Over time, Micah continued to share his story with the people of the village. His words and actions began to resonate with them, and little by little, more and more people began to believe that their lives too could be filled with light, for God's love was everywhere. The people's hearts began to open, and they began to realize that the transformation they sought was not as far away as they had once thought. It was right here within them, waiting to be embraced. Micah understood that this process would not happen overnight, but he also knew that the love of God was like a small light. It would grow, spreading warmth and hope to all who were willing to receive it. He no longer walked alone, for God's presence was always with him. No matter where he went, he carried the light of God's love within him. As he looked back toward the mountain, he saw it still towering in the distance, majestic and eternal. He knew that it was the call of that mountain that had led him to true spiritual awakening, helping him to understand that the mountain was not just a physical place, but a spiritual journey, a journey that revealed God's love and presence at every turn. God's voice still whispered within him, soft and sure, "You are never alone. I am always with you." And as the wind gently swept through the valley, Micah began his journey anew, not to find the light, but to share that light with others. He understood that the challenges, the struggles, were not obstacles but bridges to God's love. Each step he took now with God by his side would carry the light further into the hearts of those who needed it most. His journey, it seemed, had no end. It was a journey of endless discovery, of sharing the divine love that transformed him, and a journey that would continue to illuminate the world, one heart at a time. For in God's presence, no darkness was too deep, and no mountain too high. Above him the stars shimmered brightly, watching over the earth with love. Below him, a man began his descent from the mountain, his heart filled with God's light, ready to carry that light to the ends of the earth. And sometimes, God calls us to climb the mountain, not just for the summit, but for the journey of transformation, to emerge as his messengers, carrying his light into a world in need of hope.